The Alpha King's boots crunched through fresh snow, each step a measured beat of authority that had silenced stronger wolves than the winter wind. Dorian Blackthorn moved through the forest with predatory grace, tracking the scent that shouldn't exist. Omega blood, so faint it was almost a ghost, leading him deeper into territory his pack avoided. The Forgotten Grounds, they called it, where weakness went to die. He found her in a clearing where moonlight turned snow to silver. She was barely visible, a crumpled form against white, distinguished only by the spreading darkness beneath her. Blood. So much blood it had melted the snow in a widening circle, steam rising where warmth met winter. The woman lay on her side, arms curled protectively around something, her breathing so shallow, Dorian's enhanced hearing almost missed it. For a moment, the Alpha King stood motionless. He had seen death countless times, had delivered it with his own claws when necessary. But something about this scene arrested him, the stillness of it, the wrongness. The woman wore nothing but a thin dress, torn and inadequate, yet she trembled not from cold but from the effort of holding something close. Dorian approached, his shadow falling across her. That's when he heard it, a whimper, small, frightened, alive. His heart stopped. The woman's arms loosened as consciousness fled, and a tiny wolf cub tumbled free, gray fur matted with blood, one leg bent at an unnatural angle, but alive, breathing. The cub's eyes, barely open, held that distinctive amber that marked royal bloodlines. Dorian dropped to his knees, snow soaking through his clothes unnoticed. He recognized the cub instantly. Matthias, his brother's son. Missing for 3 days, presumed dead after hunters had attacked the eastern border. His hands moved without thought, reaching first for the cub, checking for life-threatening injuries. The leg was broken, but could heal. Hypothermia was the real danger. The cub was cold, so cold. Only then did Dorian truly look at the woman. Her face was turned toward him now, peaceful despite the violence written across her body. Claw marks raked down her right arm, defensive wounds. A deep gash across her ribs still leaked blood with each shallow breath. Frostbite darkened her fingertips. She had been dying slowly, painfully, yet she had used her body as a shield for his nephew. Dorian knew her. He realized with a shock that felt like claws in his chest. Arya, the Omega his pack had rejected 2 years ago. The one he had allowed them to exile. The one he had watched leave without saying a word. How long had she been out here? The Alpha King gathered the cub first, tucking Matthias against his chest where his body heat could begin the slow work of warming. Then he turned to Arya, and for the first time in a decade, Dorian Blackthorn hesitated. She was so still, so broken. Touching her felt like a violation, as if her sacrifice had been too pure for his blood-stained hands. But leaving her was unthinkable. He lifted her with a gentleness that would have shocked his pack, cradling her against him opposite the cub. She weighed almost nothing, her body light enough to frighten him. When had she last eaten? Her skin was ice against his palm, her heartbeat a whisper his wolf strained to hear. "Stay hard," he commanded, his alpha voice threading through the words even though she couldn't hear. "Stay alive." Arya didn't respond. Blood from her wound seeped into his shirt, warm and damning. As Dorian ran through the forest, faster than he'd moved in years, the lives of 2 fragile beings depending on his speed, one thought repeated in his mind with each pounding step. What have I done? The pack house erupted into chaos the moment Dorian burst through the main doors, Arya unconscious in his arms, and the missing cub visible against his chest. Wolves scattered, some crying out in relief at the sight of Matthias, others freezing when they recognized the woman, bleeding against their alpha's coat. "Get Elena," Dorian commanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Now." Elena was their healer, a woman who had seen centuries and could repair damage that would kill even the strongest wolf. She arrived within moments, her experienced eyes taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. "The royal wing," she said, already moving, "both of them." A wolf named Marcus stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Alpha, that's the Omega who—" "I know who she is." Dorian's words froze the air between them. "The royal wing, that's an order, not a suggestion." They didn't argue. No one argued with that tone. The royal wing existed in the East Tower, reserved for family and honored guests. No Omega had ever set foot inside its halls. The violation of protocol was staggering, but no wolf dared question their alpha. As he climbed the stairs, his burden held with a reverence they'd never witnessed. Elena worked through the night. Dorian stood against the wall of the healing room, watching as the elderly woman cleaned wounds, stitched torn flesh, and whispered healing chants over Arya's still form. The cub, Matthias, had been taken by his mother, who wept with relief before shooting Dorian a look that held questions he couldn't answer. How had an exiled Omega saved what the entire pack couldn't? "She's lost dangerous amounts of blood," Elena said without looking up. "Another hour in that cold, and we'd be preparing funeral rites instead of healing spells." Dorian's jaw tightened. "Will she live?" "That depends on whether she wants to." Elena's hands paused over Arya's chest, where the deepest wounds still wept despite treatment. "Her body is failing, Alpha. Starvation, exposure, these injuries. Her wolf is too weak to help her heal. She's been surviving on nothing for a long time." 2 years, Dorian thought. She's been out there for 2 years. He had known she'd been exiled. He had stood in the Great Hall when the Council declared her Omega status, a weakness the pack couldn't afford. When they'd accused her of bringing shame to their bloodline simply by existing, he had remained silent, his face carved from stone, as they'd stripped her of pack bonds and cast her beyond the territory line. She had looked at him once before leaving, just once, and the hope dying in her eyes had been worse than any enemy's hatred. Dorian hadn't thought of her often in the 2 years since, or rather, he'd trained himself not to. An alpha couldn't afford sentiment, couldn't show favoritism to those the pack deemed unworthy. His silence had been leadership, his inaction, wisdom. Looking at her now, this broken, barely breathing woman who had given everything to save a child, those justifications felt like the lies they were. "I need to know what happened," he said quietly. Elena glanced at him, her ancient eyes knowing. The wounds tell part of the story. Defensive marks on her arms and ribs. She fought something large, a bear perhaps, or a rogue wolf. The pattern suggests she put herself between the cub and whatever attacked them. The healer's voice softened. "She didn't run, Alpha. She could have, should have, given her condition. But she stood her ground." Dorian closed his eyes. Arya had never been a fighter. As an Omega, her wolf was smaller, gentler, built for nurturing, not combat. Fighting a bear or rogue should have been suicide. It nearly was. "There's something else," Elena continued, her hands moving to Arya's scarred arms. Dorian hadn't noticed the scars before, hidden beneath fresh wounds. But now he saw them, dozens of thin white lines crisscrossing her forearms. "These are old, months, maybe a year. Hunting accidents, I'd guess. She's been feeding herself, alone, with no pack to help her hunt." The implications settled over Dorian like a weight. Omegas couldn't survive alone. Their wolves were too weak, their instincts too communal. The pack knew this. That's why exile was considered a death sentence. Yet Arya had lived. For 2 years she had survived in wilderness that killed trained warriors. "Leave us," Dorian said. Helena hesitated. "She needs constant monitoring. I'll watch her." When the healer didn't move, Dorian's voice dropped to something almost human. "Please." Elena studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Call if she worsens. Her breathing is the most important thing to watch. If it becomes labored or stops." She didn't finish the sentence. Dorian understood. If she stops breathing, she's gone. The door closed with a soft click, and the Alpha King was alone with the woman he'd condemned. He moved to the chair beside her bed, his large frame uncomfortable in the delicate furniture. Up close, Arya looked even more fragile. Her brown hair, matted with blood and snow, had once shone like autumn leaves in sunlight. Her face, now hollow with starvation, had once made him pause in hallways, caught by an expression of joy he couldn't name. She had been kind. He remembered that now. Arya had been the wolf who brought food to elders who couldn't hunt, who sat with children during storms, who somehow made the pack house feel warmer, just by existing in it. And they had thrown her away. I threw her away. Dorian reached out, his hand hovering over hers before finally settling gently against her cold fingers. His wolf stirred uneasily, recognizing something it should have seen years ago. "Why did you save him?" The question fell into silence, unanswered. "You owed us nothing, less than nothing. Why?" Arya's chest rose and fell with labored breaths, each one a small victory. Her hand remained limp in his. "I'm sorry," Dorian whispered, the words foreign in his mouth. Alpha Kings didn't apologize. They commanded, decided, ruled. But sitting in this room, holding the hand of a dying woman who had shown more courage than his entire pack, the title felt like a chain. "I'm so sorry." The machines Elena had left behind beeped steadily, marking time. Outside, dawn began to break, painting the snow golden. Inside, the Alpha King held vigil over the Omega he'd failed to protect, praying to gods he'd stopped believing in that she would wake, that he would get the chance to ask her forgiveness, even though he knew he didn't deserve it. Arya woke to pain. It started in her ribs, sharp and burning with each breath. Then her arm, throbbing in time with her heartbeat. Her fingers felt distant, tingling with the electric ache of frostbite recovering. But worst was the weakness, a hollowness in her bones that made even opening her eyes feel monumental. Soft fabric beneath her, warmth surrounding her, the scent of pine and something else, alpha, strong, overwhelming, close. Her eyes flew open. The room was unfamiliar, too clean, too grand. Morning light filtered through windows that overlooked snow-covered mountains. The bed she lay in was massive, the sheets finer than anything she'd touched in years. Everything was wrong, impossible. Then she saw him. Dorian Blackthorn sat in a chair beside her bed, his powerful frame somehow diminished by exhaustion. His shirt was stained with blood, her blood, and his dark hair fell across a face carved with tension even in sleep. The Alpha King, in all his fearsome reputation, slumped in a chair like a man who'd forgotten how to rest. Arya's breath caught, sending fire through her ribs. The small sound woke him instantly. His eyes, gray like winter storms, locked on hers. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Dorian leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You're awake." His voice was rough, unused. "Don't try to move. You're badly injured." Arya's mind raced, memories flooding back in fragmented pieces. The cub, The attack. Blood in snow. She'd found the small wolf caught in a hunter's trap, its cries audible even to her weakened senses. She'd been foraging, searching for roots that might quiet the constant hunger, when she'd heard it. A royal cub. She'd known by the scent, the distinctive amber of its eyes. Lost or stolen, it didn't matter. It had been dying and she couldn't leave it. Then the bear, drawn by the cub's distress, massive and hungry. Arya had freed the cub from the trap, but the bear had been upon them before she could run, so she'd done the only thing possible, put herself between death and an innocent life. "The cub," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Is he alive, thanks to you?" Dorian's jaw tightened. "Matthias is with his mother recovering. The leg will heal cleanly." Relief washed through her so intensely that tears pricked her eyes. The cub lived. Nothing else mattered. Not her pain, not her confusion about waking in this place, not the Alpha King watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Good," she breathed, letting her eyes close. "That's good. Why did you do it?" The question made her look at him again. Dorian had stood, his presence filling the room. There was something in his face. Frustration? Anger? She couldn't tell. "He was a child," Arya said simply. "I couldn't leave him. You almost died." "I know. You understand what you saved. That cub is heir to the Eastern Territories, the firstborn of my brother. Without him, wars could have started. Alliances would have fractured." Dorian's voice rose slightly, controlled fury bleeding through. "His value to the pack is immeasurable." Arya studied him quietly, and something in her gaze made the Alpha King falter. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I didn't save him because of his value. I saved him because he was scared and hurting, and I could help." She paused, pain flashing across her features. Would it have mattered less if he was an Omega? A runt? Would his life be worth less then? The question hung between them like a blade. Dorian stood frozen, his expression shifting through emotions too quickly to name. Finally, he said quietly, "No, of course not." "Then you have your answer." Arya's eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling at her. "I'm glad he's safe, that his mother has him back. Arya." The use of her name startled her eyes open. Dorian had moved closer, his towering form somehow hesitant. "You've been in exile for 2 years, surviving alone. You were starving, injured, dying, and you still gave everything to save a pack member, a pack that cast you out." "He wasn't the one who cast me out," Arya said. "He was just a cub who needed help." Dorian flinched as if she'd struck him. He turned away, his hands clenching at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, rougher. "I should have stopped them. The council, the exile. I should have intervened. You're the Alpha King, you could have." Arya's words held no accusation, just fact. "But you didn't, and I survived anyway." "Barely. Barely is enough." The silence stretched. Outside, birds began their morning songs, oblivious to the weight in the room. Dorian's shoulders were rigid, his alpha presence dimmed by something Arya had never seen in him before: shame. "Why didn't you fight back?" he asked. "When the council declared exile, you didn't defend yourself, didn't argue. You just left." Arya's laugh was bitter and small. "What would I have said? That I deserved to stay. The pack believed I was weak, a liability. Maybe they were right." "They weren't right." Dorian turned back to her, his gray eyes intense. "What you did, surviving alone, saving Matthias, that took more strength than any warrior in my pack possesses. You were never weak." Then why did you let them say I was? The question emerged quietly, without anger, which somehow made it worse. Why did you stand there and watch them strip everything from me without saying a word? Dorian had no answer, or rather he had answers, excuses about pack unity, about the appearance of favoritism, about maintaining his authority. But looking at Arya now, they all crumbled to dust. I was wrong, he finally said. I was wrong, and you paid the price for my cowardice. Arya closed her eyes, tears sliding down her temples. I don't want your apologies, Alpha. I want to understand why saving one life was worth all this. She gestured weakly at the room, at him, when saving myself never was. The machines around her beeped steadily, marking time neither of them wanted. Dorian stood helpless before this fragile woman who had exposed every failure of his leadership with simple truth. Rest, he said finally, his voice rough. You need to heal. And then? Dorian struggled with words that felt too important to rush. Then we talk about what comes next, if you'll allow it. Arya didn't respond, sleep already pulling her under. But in the moment before consciousness fled, she whispered something so quietly Dorian almost missed it. I never stopped being Pack, not in my heart. The Alpha King stood alone in the golden morning light, those words echoing in, his mind like an indictment. Word spread through the pack like wildfire. The exiled Omega was in the royal wing. The Alpha King himself tended her. She had saved the heir, nearly dying in the process. Opinions fractured along lines that had nothing to do with truth and everything to do with pride. Dorian sat in his study 3 days after finding Arya, listening to his council argue. The same wolves who had condemned her now debated her fate with passionate intensity, as if they hadn't been the ones to cast her out. She's proven her value, Marcus said, his tone measured. Saving the heir changes everything. The pack owes her a debt. We owe her nothing, countered Silas, an older wolf whose scars spoke of battles won. She did what any decent wolf would do. That doesn't erase 2 years of absence, or the weakness that led to her exile. Dorian's fingers tightened on his chair's armrest, wood creaking under the pressure. His wolf prowled just beneath his skin, demanding he defend. Arya, silence these fools who valued strength over compassion. But years of controlling every instinct kept him still. The circumstances of her exile, Elena said carefully from her corner, deserve examination. Omega status alone isn't grounds for removal from the pack. There were accusations of her being a drain on resources, but I've reviewed the records. Arya consumed less than any 10 wolves here and contributed through care work that we've struggled to replace. Silas waved dismissively. Sentiment. The pack is stronger without weak links. Is it? Dorian's voice cut through the discussion like a blade, and every wolf fell silent. Tell me, Silas, in the 3 days since Matthias went missing, how many warriors did we send to find him? 50 of our best. 50 warriors who found nothing, who returned empty-handed while the lone Omega not only located my nephew, but fought off a bear to protect him. Dorian stood, his presence filling the room. Perhaps it's time we re-examine what we define as strength. The council shifted uncomfortably. Marcus cleared his throat. What are you proposing, Alpha? I'm proposing nothing. I'm deciding. Dorian's gray eyes swept the room, challenging anyone to speak. Arya will be welcomed back into the pack with full rights and honors. Her exile is nullified, effective immediately. The pack won't accept, Silas began. The pack will accept what I decree. Alpha power threaded through Dorian's words, pressing down on every wolf present. And if any member has objections, they're welcome to challenge me for leadership. I'll be in the training grounds at dawn. No one moved. Challenging an alpha king was suicide, and they all knew it. There's more, Dorian continued, his voice quieter, but no less commanding. Every Omega in this pack will have their status reviewed. If we've exiled others because we mistook gentleness for weakness, those wrongs will be corrected. Elena smiled slightly, the first expression of approval Dorian had seen in days. The others looked varying degrees of shocked. We'll be seen as soft, Marcus warned. Other packs. Other packs can think what they like. Dorian turned to the window, looking out over the snow-covered territory. Strength without compassion is cruelty. We've been cruel long enough. The council dispersed slowly, wolves exchanging glances that spoke of confusion and calculation. Only Elena remained, approaching Dorian with the careful step of someone who'd known him since childhood. She's awake more often, the healer said gently, asking about the cub, about what happens next. What do you tell her? That she's healing, that she's safe. Elena paused. I don't tell her about the council's debates or about how half the pack wants to worship her, while the other half resents the shame she represents. Dorian's jaw tightened. They should be ashamed. Yes, they should. Elena's hand settled on his shoulder, a familiarity only she could claim. But shame often turns to anger, Dorian. Be careful. Arya is still weak, and there are wolves who see her survival as a threat to everything they believe. Let them try to touch her, Dorian growled, his wolf rising. Just let them try. Elena studied him with ancient, knowing eyes. This isn't just about righting a wrong, is it? Dorian didn't answer immediately. He thought of Arya's hand in his, cold and fragile, of the way she'd looked at him in the great hall 2 years ago, hope dying as he remained silent, of her whisper, I never stopped being Pack. She showed more courage bleeding out in the snow than I've shown in a decade of ruling, he finally said. If that's not worthy of protection, what is? And if she doesn't forgive you, if she takes her place back in the pack but wants nothing to do with the alpha who abandoned her? The question struck deep. Dorian had asked himself the same thing during the long nights watching Arya sleep, listening to her labored breathing, slowly strengthen into something steadier. Then I'll accept that, he said quietly, and spend the rest of my life ensuring she never has to fight alone again. Elena squeezed his shoulder before leaving. Dorian remained at the window, watching snow fall over the forest where he'd found Arya dying. Somewhere in those trees she had survived alone for 2 years, built shelter, hunted, endured winters that killed trained warriors, and she had done it all while his pack, remained warm and fed, never thinking of the Omega they'd discarded. No more, Dorian promised silently. Whatever it takes, no more. Arya sat by the window, her healing body wrapped in blankets soft enough to make her suspicious. The royal wing still felt like a trap, too warm, too comfortable, too far from the harsh reality she'd learned to survive. But she was growing stronger. The pain in her ribs had dulled to an ache. Her arm no longer screamed with every movement. She could leave soon. The thought brought both relief and a strange, hollow sadness she couldn't name. A knock at the door made her turn. Dorian entered without waiting for permission, an alpha's habit, but he paused just inside, as if uncertain of his welcome. He carried a tray, steam rising from whatever food it held. Elena says you need to eat more, he said, setting it on the table beside her. Real meals, not the scraps you've been picking at." Arya looked at the tray. Roasted meat, fresh bread, vegetables she recognized from the pack's winter gardens. Enough food for 3 wolves. Her stomach clenched with want, but her pride stiffened her spine. "I can feed myself," she said quietly. "I know you can. You've been feeding yourself for 2 years. Dorian sat across from her, his large frame somehow careful. "That's not why I brought it." "Then why?" "Because I want to." He met her eyes, and Arya saw something there she'd never witnessed in the Alpha King. Vulnerability. "Because watching you survive on nothing is a reminder of every way I've failed you, and I'm selfish enough to want to ease that guilt." The honesty startled her. Arya reached for the bread, tearing a piece slowly. It was warm, fresh baked. The first bite nearly made her weep. They sat in silence while she ate. Dorian didn't push conversation, didn't fill the quiet with apologies she wouldn't believe. He simply sat, his presence steady, while Arya allowed herself something she hadn't experienced in 2 years: safety. "I'm reinstating you to the pack," Dorian said finally. "Full rights and honors. Your exile is nullified." Arya's hand paused halfway to her mouth. "Because I saved Matthias. Because exiling you was wrong." Dorian leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "It was wrong 2 years ago, and it's wrong now. What you did for my nephew only made that truth impossible to ignore. So I had to nearly die for you to see it." Arya's voice held no accusation, just tired observation. "How many others have you cast out? How many are still out there, trying to survive because they weren't lucky enough to stumble across a royal cub?" The question hit like a physical blow. Dorian's expression crumbled, revealing the weight he'd been carrying. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm going to find out. Every exile in the past decade is being reviewed. If any were unjust." They were all unjust. Arya set down the bread, her appetite suddenly gone. "Every wolf you threw away because they were different, weaker, inconvenient. They were all unjust. You just needed me to bleed in the snow to realize it." "You're right," Dorian's hands clenched. "I have no defense, no excuse that matters. I was a coward who prioritized appearance over compassion, and wolves suffered for it. You suffered for it." Arya studied him, this powerful alpha who ruled with absolute authority, now stripped bare by guilt. Part of her wanted to rage at him, to make him feel every cold night, every failed hunt, every moment. She'd wondered if she'd survive until morning, but she was too tired for rage. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "My forgiveness? My gratitude for being allowed back into a pack that never wanted me?" "I want—" Dorian stopped, struggling with words. "I want you to stay. Not because you're obligated, but because you choose to. I want the chance to show you that the pack can be different, better, that I can be better." "Why?" "Because you deserve it. Because watching you—" He gestured helplessly. "You saved a child who meant nothing to you personally. You showed more leadership bleeding out than I've shown in years of ruling. You reminded me what we're supposed to be protecting. And if I can't forgive you?" Arya's voice was soft, but the question cut deep. "If I stay, but I can't forget the way you stood there, silent, while they destroyed my life?" Dorian met her eyes, and the pain there was almost enough to crack her resolve. "Then I'll accept it," he said, "and I'll spend however long it takes proving that your trust, if I ever earn it back, won't be misplaced again." Outside, the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. Arya watched the light shift, thinking of all the sunsets she'd watched alone, wondering if she'd see another dawn. "I never wanted to be special," she said quietly. I just wanted to belong, to be part of something bigger than survival. She looked at him, tears threatening. You took that from me. The pack took that from me. And now you're offering it back like a gift when it should have been mine all along. I know. Dorian's voice was rough with emotion. I know, and I'm sorry. It's not enough, those words. Nothing I say will be enough. But they're true, Arya. I'm sorry. She wanted to harden her heart, to protect herself from the hope rising in her chest. But Arya had spent 2 years alone, had forgotten what it felt like to hear her name spoken with reverence instead of dismissal. And despite everything, despite the hurt and abandonment, she was so tired of being alone. I'll stay, she said finally, but not for you. For the pack I remember, the one that existed before fear made it cruel. For the wolves who might need someone to stand up for them the way no one stood up for me. Dorian nodded, acceptance and gratitude warring in his expression. That's more than I deserve. Yes, Arya agreed, it is. They sat together as darkness fell, 2 wolves separated by hurt and hierarchy, united by the fragile possibility that broken things could sometimes be repaired. Whether they should be was a question neither could answer yet. But in the silence between them, something shifted. Not forgiveness. That would take far longer if it came at all. But perhaps the beginning of understanding, of recognition that strength came in forms they'd been too blind to see. And sometimes, Arya thought, watching the Alpha King who had failed her trying so desperately to make amends, that was enough to start with. Spring came slowly to the mountains, melting snow revealing earth that had slept through winter. Arya stood in the garden she'd begun cultivating, a small plot near the pack house where medicinal herbs grew alongside vegetables. Her hands, scarred but steady, worked the soil with practiced efficiency. She had been back with the pack for 3 months. Some wolves welcomed her with genuine warmth, ashamed of their past silence. Others maintained careful distance, uncertain how to approach someone who had been both cast out and elevated. Arya navigated it all with quiet grace, neither seeking approval nor shrinking from connection. Dorian watched from a distance more often than she acknowledged. He had kept his word. 7 Omegas wrongly exiled had been found and brought home, offered reparations and apologies. The council had been restructured, its power checked by voices that valued compassion alongside strength. The pack was changing, slowly but undeniably. But between Arya and Dorian the distance remained. You hover, Arya said without turning around, though she'd felt his presence for several minutes. Dorian approached, his movements careful. I wanted to tell you. Matthias asked about you. He wants to thank you himself. Arya's hands paused in the soil. He's very young. He doesn't need to carry gratitude like a debt. He wants to give you something. He made it himself. Dorian held out a small carved wolf, its form clumsy but heartfelt. He said you were the bravest wolf he's ever met. Arya took the carving, her eyes softening. Tell him I'll treasure it. You could tell him yourself. He's hoping you'll visit. She looked at Dorian then, really looked at him. The Alpha King had changed too. Lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and his authority had been tempered by something gentler. Awareness, perhaps, of the weight his decisions carried. I'll visit, Arya agreed. But Dorian, I know. He smiled sadly. I'm trying to earn what I can't demand. Are you? Arya stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Or are you trying to ease your guilt by turning me into a symbol, the Omega who proved everyone wrong? The question was fair, and Dorian had asked himself the same thing countless times. Maybe both, he admitted. I'm trying to be better, Arya. For you, yes, but also for every wolf I failed before I knew failure had a face and a name. Does that make it selfish? I don't know, Arya said honestly. I'm still deciding if you deserve an answer. They stood in the garden, surrounded by new growth, while the pack moved around them, working, laughing, living. Arya had found her place again, carving out a role that utilized her gentleness as the strength it had always been. She cared for the sick, taught the young, and reminded everyone that power without compassion was just cruelty with authority. Dorian had learned from her example, but the question remained. Had he learned because it was right, or because she'd made it impossible not to see his failures? I should go, Arya said, collecting her tools. The elders need help with evening preparations. Arya, Dorian's voice stopped her. I know you don't owe me anything. I know that what I'm trying to build with you might never exist. But I want you to know, whether you forgive me or not, whether you ever see me as more than the alpha who abandoned you, I'm grateful you survived, that the world still has your kindness in it. Arya's eyes glistened, though she didn't let the tears fall. You want forgiveness, Dorian? Earn it by making sure no one else has to bleed in the snow to prove their worth. She walked away, leaving him standing among growing things, her words settling into his chest like seeds. Did he deserve her forgiveness? Dorian didn't know. Maybe he never would. But he knew he would spend every day trying to become worthy of the faith she'd shown by staying, by choosing to rebuild rather than run. In the distance. Arya paused at the pack-house door, turning back to look at him. For just a moment, their eyes met across the garden. In hers, he saw pain and possibility tangled together, a complexity he'd spent too long pretending didn't exist. Then she was gone, and Dorian was left with the question that had no easy answer. Could a wolf who had learned compassion only through another's suffering ever truly be redeemed? The garden grew quiet around him, offering no response. Only time would tell if the changes he'd made would root deep enough to matter, or if they were just the desperate attempts of a guilty man trying to rewrite history he couldn't change. Dorian returned to his duties, carrying Arya's words and the weight of his choices. Some debts, he was learning, could never be fully repaid, only honored through daily effort to be better than the wolf he'd been. Whether that would ever be enough was Arya's decision to make, and perhaps in the mercy of that uncertainty lay his true redemption. In a pack where strength was worshipped, one Omega taught them that the mightiest power was the courage to show compassion when the world demanded cruelty. Whether the Alpha who had abandoned her truly learned that lesson or merely performed it to ease his guilt remained a question even she couldn't answer. But she had survived, and in survival, she had proven that sometimes the greatest rebellion is simply refusing to let others define your worth.